Seema, let's start the recording now. A very good evening or morning, ladies and gentlemen, and an extremely warm welcome to everyone at today's digital dialogues organized by the Broadband India Forum on the topic 6 GHz coexistence study. It is my privilege and honor to welcome the eminent speakers today who have joined us. Professor Abhay Karandikar, Director, IIT Kanpur, Professor Kiran Kuchi, Professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering at IIT Hyderabad, Mr. Ted Kaplan, CEO and Chief Systems Engineer for RKF Engineering in the US, Dr. Farinaz Idalat, Senior Scientist for RKF Engineering, Dr. Michael Mandel, Senior Scientist at RKF Engineering, and Dr. Puneet Rathod, Lead for Technical Standards with Qualcomm. The moderator for today's session will be Mr. Debashish Bhattacharjee, our Senior Deputy Director General of the Broadband India Forum, and the rapporteur will be Mr. Abhijit Panikar, Deputy Director Research for the Broadband India Forum. With this, let me welcome you all once again, and let's get started. But some housekeeping announcements before I invite TD for his introductory remarks. 1, all speakers are requested to keep their mics on mute if they are not speaking. During the question and answer session, the moderator will determine the opportunity to invite you to speak, at which point you will unmute yourself.
Am I mute or unmute?
Keeping your camera on is a matter of personal choice and convenience, except when speaking. However, in the event of a loss of bandwidth, my personal experience has been that switching off the camera seems to help. This event is being recorded, and the link will be shared with all participants to revisit and share with your colleagues and friends if you wish. Please use the chat window below for any questions. To enable chat, you can find a chat button on your screen below. For our speakers, since this is a virtual event, sometimes there may be a lag due to bandwidth or otherwise. So please keep the pace of your presentation alongside it. With that, let me invite our President for Broadband India Forum, Mr. TV Ramachandran, for his introductory remarks. TV, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rajat. Good evening, everybody here in India. Good morning to all our friends joining from the USA and the West. Respected Chief Guest, Professor Abhay Karandikar. Respected Special Guest of Honor, Professor Kiran Kuchi. Respected guests from US, Mr. Ted Kaplan, CEO of RKF Engineering, and his senior colleagues, Senior Scientist Dr. Farinaz Idalat, and Senior Scientist Dr. Michael Mandel, Dr. Puneet Rathod, Lead Technical Standards Qualcomm, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me tremendous pleasure to give a few introductory remarks on this important occasion of the release of the study report on frequency sharing for radio local area networks, or RLANs, in the 6 GHz bands in India. The importance of more and more license-exempt shared spectrum to cater to the explosive growth of short-range wireless services and devices in the fields of healthcare, telemetry, etc., as well as to cater to the humongous requirement of download and offload requirements to serve the cause of broadband for all, cannot at all be overstated. This is particularly true of India, which is set to race forward most aggressively on the digital highway. It is the second highest in the world in terms of broadband connections, and with still 50% headroom to go for growth. And has also the highest level of data usage per subscriber per month, which is rising significantly, steadily. The proliferation on the fronts of telemetry, healthcare, education, IoT, etc. is tremendous. However, the availability of either the number of Wi-Fi hotspots per POP or per unit area, or the amount of unlicensed spectrum made available for Wi-Fi and SRD is in India somewhat challenged, extremely low. Public Wi-Fi hotspots are less than 1% of global norms. I repeat, less than 1% of global norms. An unlicensed spectrum is barely 15%, 15%. That's about 1/7 of what other countries have. We from BIF are therefore extremely bullish in this matter to help leverage the huge potential for growth before us, because broadband for all is our fundamental credo, our mission. And we think it will be a big win-win for all stakeholders, consumers, small entrepreneurs, MSMEs, telcos, R&D and innovators, for all of them to address this area which has such a room for growth. In fact, I think most experts would agree that delicensing of the full 1200 megahertz of 6 gigahertz band is extremely vital for fostering innovation in the digital environment. In the context of the above, the frequency sharing amongst RLANs in the 6 gigahertz band is a matter of critical importance for India. And RKF Engineering, who are so deeply experienced in conducting in-depth coexistence studies and other analytical work, and have done great work for many regulators and other agencies, have kindly consented to do a research study for us. The current research report of theirs studies or covers 3 different types of RLANs. Firstly, the low power indoor LPI. Secondly, the standard power SP, indoor and outdoor, with automated frequency coordination, that is AFC. And thirdly, very low power indoor and outdoor. It should be noted that these 3 classes of RLANs are based on rules that have been proposed by other regulatory bodies, authorities like FCC, Ofcom, ECC of Europe, and so on. So they have to be studied thoroughly, and they have done that in the study. They've also, I'm very happy to say, the study has used real-life operational conditions based on the population density in India, as well as keeping in mind the projected consumer and business usage patterns prevailing here. So it's a very practical, in-depth research study that our scientists from RKF have been so kind enough to do for us. We are very, very happy to welcome you all for this release function and warmly thank our esteemed chief guest, Professor Abhay Karandikar, is an old friend, amongst other things, and special guest of honor, Professor Kiran Kuchi, Dean of R&D in IIT Hyderabad, who's also a great friend of many years, as well as the distinguished RKF team for making this possible today. RKF would be making a presentation on the highlights of the reports, and we earnestly hope that you'll find it, the report, the presentation, and the discussions in this conference, both useful and interesting. Thank you for your patient hearing for these initial words. With that, I would now like to say a few words in introduction of our chief guest, Professor Abhay Karandikar, before inviting him to grace the occasion of the release of the report. It's, of course, a tremendous pleasure to say a few words about Professor Abhay Karandikar. It's very difficult to stop with a few words, so you'll have to pardon me if I go on. I'm such an admirer of his. And then I will invite him to release a report. Professor Karandikar is practically a byword in the fields of rural broadband as well as wireless research. I repeat that, in rural broadband, the amount of work he has done is phenomenal, and in wireless research. He was earlier in IIT Bombay, then now the director of IIT Kanpur, top Ivy League universities of India, research institutions and universities. He is a founding member and former chairman of India's SDO, Standard Development Organization, TSDSI, and was also a part-time member of the regulator, TRAI. He's been awarded with IEEE's Essays Standards Medallion in 2016, has countless patents to his name, and innumerable contributions to IEEE, 3GPP standards, and to the Indian policymaking sector. We are indeed most honored that he could participate in this important launch of the report, despite the fact that he is traveling, I think, at this time. Or I don't know whether he is, I think I
No,
see.
I just decided to stay for some time. I'll just leave after.
Otherwise, he's going to have a difficult time in taking it from the car. But even then, he said, I will do it. I'm so glad that he could be. So thank you very much, Professor Abhay. Thank you very much, RKF, Team RKF. Thank you very much, Dr. Puneet Rathod, everybody. I will not take up any more time, but just re-emphasize that I have the utmost pleasure in requesting the Honorable Professor to kindly release the report electronically. Over to you, Arun, for release of the report.
Many thanks to our respected chief guest, Professor Abhay Karandikar, Director, IIT Kanpur, for releasing the report prepared by RKF Engineering on frequency sharing for RLANs in the 6 GHz band in India. We are pleased to acknowledge his mentoring the project for preparation of the report. Highlights of the report will now be presented by Mr. Ted Kaplan, CEO and Chief Systems Engineer, RKF Engineering.
Thank you, Arun. We call Arun the Amitabh Bachchan of BIF because of his rich baritone. He's a competitor for Amitabh Bachchan. So thank you for assisting Professor Abhay to release the report. Thank you, Professor Abhay, and over to you for your... no, sorry, after this, I think I will... The sequences, I'm sorry. I should now call upon Mr. Ted Kaplan to present the highlights of the report. I'm sorry for that.
Thank you. I'll let me share my screen then. So I'm visible?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present our study. This study showed that unlicensed RLAN use in the 6 GHz band is compatible with existing FS and FSS allocations in the band. I was a technical advisor on this study. Dr. Fernandez was the program lead on the project, and Dr. Michael Mandel was the technical lead in the program, and he'll be available to help answer questions at the end. We will review the objectives of the study, the methodology and the RLAN assumptions, and then we will go over the FSS and the FS sharing results.
Ted, it looks like that you have your audio is garbled. So if you could kindly switch off your video, maybe there may be some bandwidth issue at your end. I would suggest you switch off the video, keep your audio on, and maybe it'll probably be better, easier to hear.
Yeah, let me figure out how to do that. Where's the?
Just below the screen, if you go down, you'll see it says stop video. Just click on that.
I'm in a different mode right now.
Or you're in a different mode. I understand. So
You're gonna have to expand this.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My voice better?
Not yet, but hopefully it should get better. Please carry on.
I'll try to speak clearly. We will, as I said, we will go over the objectives, the study methodology, and the RLAN assumptions, and then we will go over the FSS and FS sharing results. The objective, the study was to study sharing between the RLAN devices and the 6 gigahertz band and FS microwave stations in India and FSS uplinks over India. The approach is Monte Carlo, where we do a random chop of active RLAN's proportion to the population. We repeat the chops many times to create interference to noise ratio, cumulative distribution functions at the FS and the FSS receivers. The process is assumed to be stochastic such that we need to generate enough random iterations to see, 10 interference events above the threshold I/N before we can say the events are significant. The RLAN assumptions. The RLAN deployment model is complex. It is hard to describe in a few sentences. It includes reasonable statistical operating assumptions developed to account for the myriad of possible use cases. The report goes into a lot of detail describing this model. The model considers morphology, urban, suburban, and rural, with corporate and public and home submarkets. Key operating parameters that affect the received interference level include the RLAN source, EIRP, bandwidth, channel usage, and installed heights. Because these operating parameters can vary statistically, distributions are derived for use in the simulations. Furthermore, a detailed Airlink model was constructed to represent the RLAN usage, specifically the number of simultaneously active RLANs that we would expect. And this was projected to, based on the population for the year 2025. The model assumed 4.4 billion RLANs in India, and with the activity factors factored in, there were 1.8 million simultaneously active RLANs assumed over India. Each individual in India was assumed to have 10 devices. One of the devices is high activity. So if you're a home user, you're doing video or gaming at 4.4 megabits per second. The model distributed active users by population during the worst case busy hour when most people are at home. 85% of urban users are assumed to be at home, and 90% of rural users are assumed to be at home. And in order to get the activity factor, 31% of India is assumed to be urban and 69% is assumed to be rural. A mix of terminal types was assumed. Most of these terminal types are going to be low power indoor. These transmit at a maximum EIRP of 30 dBm, and when the client device was assumed to incur a 4 dB body loss. The standard power devices are assumed to be installed professionally, and they have this automatic frequency coordination where they are assumed to choose frequencies to avoid interference to the FS. But the interference is still additive towards the satellites. The model included a random channel bandwidth and building height distribution model, and all this is documented in great detail in the report. FS sharing assumptions and results. In order to analyze the FS, we assumed that a narrow beam covering India, just India, and a regional beam covering more area that would see more RLAN with a lower G over T. These were based on satellites that were representative of today. And for this analysis, we distributed the islands over the full coverage area that included population in India, Europe, the rest of Asia, Africa, and Australia. So fully loaded up the beams. We used a 4/3 Earth primarily to determine the radio horizon, and we added in ITU clutter models based on morphology and included a statistical building penetration loss model P2109. We did 10 iterations of the RLAN drops were simulated because there were so many RLANs in our simulation. For each iteration, the IRN and each FS transponder across the channel plan was calculated. It assumed 36 megahertz transponders in the analysis. Because there was such a large number of RLANs, the statistics in each channel was very consistent. The worst case IRN that we saw was minus 26.8 dB, both satellites, and based on that, we concluded that there wasn't harmful interference to the FS uplink, the 6 gigahertz. Next, we did the sharing, the FS sharing analysis. For this, we studied FS in 2 representative regions, rural and Alwal, where we had 18 FS, and urban Delhi NCA with 421 FS. We used available data and specifications to define the rural and urban FS, and implemented statistical propagation models shown in the table, which was made up of 3 parts. One, within 30 meters, free space loss, 30 meters to 1 kilometer, combined line of sight, non-line of sight 1 or 2, and above 1 kilometer, P452 plus clutter. For each area, we first calculate the aggregate interference CDF over all the FS in that region. This included simulations with 100,000 iterations over 18 FS in Alwar, and 1,000 iterations over 420 FS in Delhi. And the figures show the CDFs that resulted of Alwar and Delhi. And so this is showing you the probability that you get interference in FS in rural region, Alwar, and in the urban region, Delhi. And we're highlighting the IRN of -6 and the yellow line IRN of 0 dB, and we're showing what the probability in percent that you exceed those levels. The next thing we did was an availability study. We used ITUR P.530 to calculate the distribution of fades. And we targeted 99.999% availability on the distribution curve. And then we used our interference distribution to do from the FS to the FS to do a convolution of the interference distribution with the fade distribution, assuming that they're independent. And we looked at the 99.99% point on that curve, and we looked at the increase in the unavailability, the reduction in availability due to the interference, and we were trying to compare the reduction to a 10% target based on ITUR F.1094. And what we found was that all those links, or except for a few links, they all met the 10% criteria. There were a few links that didn't. We took a closer look at those links specifically, and we based on their characteristics, they had some excess margin, which wasn't taken into account in the first analysis. So when we took into account that excess margin, what we found was that they indeed met the 10% criteria. In addition, we also noted that all the links then met a 1% sensitivity threshold, we called it, but the unavailability didn't increase by more than 1% for any link. And so based on that, we assumed that there was no harmful interference. That concludes the presentation of the report. Hopefully I stayed within the 10 minutes. And thank you. And hopefully I was clear.
Okay, so thank you, Ted. We will now, I would now probably request Professor Kiran Kuchi to kindly address the audience, please. Before he addresses the audience, I would like to give a brief background about Professor Kuchi for the audience. Dr. Kiran Kuchi is the Professor, Department of Electrical Engineering at IIT Hyderabad. He's a globally recognized innovator in the realm of 5G standards development. Dr. Kuchi incubated a startup company, YSIG Networks, in 2016 at the IIT Hyderabad Tech Incubator with an aim to productionize the said prototypes and inventions. Dr. Kuchi's commercialization efforts, coupled with his portfolio of patents, are likely to accelerate indigenous product development and commercialization in the 5G space. With these few words of introduction, I would now request Dr. Kiran Kuchi to kindly address the gathering, please. Over to you, Professor Kuchi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate BIF for taking this task of addressing the 6 gigahertz coexistence study. Excellent report by Mr. Ted. Very detailed analysis and study, very convincing results showing that there is no harmful interference to the existing services. That's a very, very good news to hear based on the detailed simulation analysis. So I want to say that the 6 gigahertz band, which is already being delicensed in several other countries, is a very, very useful band, and it's high time this is taken very seriously in India. With Wi-Fi 6 coming around the corner, this can really spur a lot of innovation and research and new applications, which will complement upcoming 5G deployments in India. And as you very well know that in India, there is a heavy reliance on cellular internet access, and usage of Wi-Fi is very low compared to many other countries. And hopefully, with this new generation of Wi-Fi systems coming into picture, this band is going to play a very important role, supplementing 5G. I'm very happy to attend this event and see this study report, and wish you good luck to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kuchi, for your excellent and kind words, and give us a perspective about the 6 gigahertz, the possibilities in the 6 gigahertz spectrum band. With this, I would now look forward to requesting our chief guest for this evening, Professor Abhay Karandikar, to kindly address the entire gathering. Before he does that, I would like to just, for the audience, give a brief introduction about Professor Karandikar.
Professor, I think TV has already given, so.
Okay, so in that case, I thought I will, for the sake of those who have joined later, I thought I'll give a few words of introduction about you. But in case you feel comfortable otherwise, sir, you can kindly take the floor and start your address, please. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Debashish. Thank you also, Mr. T.V. Ramachandran, President of Broadband India Forum, and also Mr. Rajat Mukherjee, Director General, for inviting me to this important event. First of all, let me congratulate the RKF engineering team led by Mr. Ted Kaplan for a very comprehensive study of coexistence in 6 gigahertz band of essentially, RLAN. Basically, we are talking of Wi-Fi. Its coexistence with the existing services of both FS links and also the fixed satellite links in the Indian context. This study was very much required. As all of you know that in India, we have led a lot of emphasis on providing digital connectivity. In fact, recently, the Honorable Prime Minister of India has launched the Gati Shakti mission, which is essentially, providing the digital connectivity infrastructure, because there is an increasing realization that the digital connectivity is touching almost every sector of economy. It is not just for the communications or internet access, but it is connecting the retail sectors, the banking and financial sectors, agriculture, transportation, health sector, and more recently, we have seen its increasing use in online education and educational technology itself. So therefore, the importance of providing broadband connectivity has tremendously increased. And in this context, therefore, the unlicensed Wi-Fi will play a very, very important role in providing affordable access to an unconnected population. And it is in this context, I know that the Broadband India Forum has been asking for more and more spectrum to be delicensed. And particularly, I think now there is a real need for delicensing a significant amount of spectrum in the 6 gigahertz band. As Professor Kiran Kuchi also mentioned, and T.V. Ramachandran also mentioned, that in the US and many parts of the world, almost 1200 megahertz of spectrum is available and has been delicensed. And this gives an immense opportunity to provide affordable broadband access, because the spectrum cost also gets factored into the providing the affordable broadband access. Not only we can get affordable broadband access, but the real the amount of spectrum that is available can also make the internet access speeds to be almost equal to what we can call it like a wireless digital fiber. So it will be like a radio fiber connectivity that we can provide to the homes. In this context, Wi-Fi 6 actually complement the 5G use cases, particularly for low mobility and stationary access. And in fact, it will really nicely supplements the enhanced mobile broadband use case of the 5G. So the Wi-Fi 6 can, as a technology, has a tremendous opportunity of coexisting with the 5G use cases or the 5G deployment, and therefore can complement, the public hotspots and the enterprise and the home use cases for using, all the technologies for healthcare, education, work from home, and several other expanding use cases. And there has been a concern because in this band we have deployed. This band has been used for the fixed link services and also for the fixed satellite link. And therefore, there has been a concern that if this band is delicensed in India, it may cause interference to the existing services, particularly for the satellite links. And I'm very delighted to see that this comprehensive study by RKF, which has taken into account the characteristics of the Indian scenario, particularly the urban and the semi-urban and the rural. As all of you know that the urban, semi-urban and the rural scenarios, particularly the kind of the way in which our cities have been structured or our villages have been structured in terms of housing, in terms of the shopping malls and the shopping complexes. That has all been factored because that does affect the propagation characteristics. So all those factors have been taken into account in this comprehensive study. And I'm delighted to see that detailed simulations reveal that the interference to the fixed satellite links is almost negligible from a large-scale deployment of the Wi-Fi 6 devices at different power levels. And the detailed study, the detailed presentation which Ted Kaplan has given has actually enumerated the results at various power levels and at various deployment scenarios. I believe, therefore, this study can be used as a benchmark for delicensing a large amount of spectrum in the 6 gigahertz band. And that will give us an opportunity for the service providers to deploy the Wi-Fi in this band, enabling a large-scale access to a population which is still looking for a good customer experience when we are using the broadband. I'm hopeful that this study will be very useful for the policymakers in the Department of Telecom, Ministry of Communications, and also the regulator TRAI to make long-lasting decision on the delicensing of this band. And since now, this report has demonstrated that the interference to the existing services is less, we can also have the existing services operating as it is, without any disturbance, and still, we can benefit we can have the benefits of Wi-Fi 6 for the Indian population. So thank you once again to BIF for commissioning this study by RKF. And I also compliment the RKF for a very detailed and a comprehensive study, which took into account the propagation characteristics and models which are relevant in the Indian context. We have had several calls and discussions with the team. And I'm really very happy that the outcome has been very satisfying for all of us. So thank you once again for inviting me to this important event. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for giving us excellent insight into what is the potential of 6 gigahertz and what this report means for the larger masses when it comes to proliferation of broadband in this country. Thank you, sir, for giving us the direction in this regard. With this now, I would now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Q&A session, which everyone is looking forward to. I also noticed that Farinaz has joined us back. So welcome, Farinaz. So before I hand over the floor to our moderator, who will be for the session, the Q&A session, which is Dr. Puneet Rathod, I would briefly give an introduction about Dr. Puneet Rathod. Just a second, please. So Dr. Puneet Rathod is the lead technical standards in Qualcomm. He is a PhD from IIT Mumbai with a 15+ years of wireless R&D experience. He has a diverse experience of working as an academic researcher, he's also a co-founder of a startup dealing with public safety communications and standardization research in multinational companies. He has contributed to national and international standardization efforts at 3GPP, IEEE, and ITUR. His recent work has been focused around spectrum and standardization as a lead technical standards with Qualcomm Standards and Industry Organization. I now have the pleasure of calling upon Dr. Puneet Rathod to take the floor and moderate the Q&A session. Over to you, Dr. Puneet.
Thank you so much, Devashish, and thank you, BIF, for inviting me and be part of this this very esteemed gathering. And to begin with, at least let me also say a special thanks to Professor Abhay, who was our mentor through this entire activity, and especially for me, it is a great pleasure to get a chance to work with him once again after many years. So that was a very nice experience. So let me begin with one question for Ted, which is, do we have similar experiences of studies on 6 gigahertz elsewhere in other countries, and what are the similarities or differences that you see from the 6 gigahertz study that we have done for India?
Well, we did studies in the US, we did studies in Europe. Baroness might want to answer more detail about them. In the US, we considered 100,000 FS, and we have a much better understanding of morphologies there. So we felt like the propagation and certainly the details we had in India translated, but we had very detailed link characteristics in the US for the FS. So we were able to really understand in the US exactly how the microwave stations, for example, were being designed, and in almost every case there was margin, more margin than we would have expected on those links, and the availabilities were very high. And translating that to India, I think that our answers are pretty conservative there. Farina, is there anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So I would say that amongst all the studies that we've done, so US, Europe, and Mexico, for FSS, the results were practically all very similar in terms of the types of IURN levels that we got. And for the FS, we did very similar analysis. We did a number of simulation iterations sufficient to get statistically significant results based on the number of RLANs and the number of FS. And the end result was, again, very similar in terms of the IURN exceedance. And particularly all it comes down to the impact on the unavailability to the FS. And in all cases, they met the target availabilities, and still there were additional margins for those links. And yes, and I would say it is true that for other countries we had, I guess for Mexico we didn't have as much FS data, but for Europe and US we actually analyzed their actual links, and still we got similar results. So I think that's pretty promising. And when we actually analyzed the details of the cases where they had exceedance, there were, again, as it was mentioned in the report, there were similarities of the cases that result in higher IURN.
Thank you. So let me try to get some perspective about India, which is also something which Professor Abhay mentioned about Gati Shakti and the government initiatives. And then we also have one more government initiative which already exists, which is PM Vani. To Professor Abhay, what would be your comment or remarks on giving or making more unlicensed spectrum available in addition to 2.4 and 5 gigahertz in the context of making broadband or affordable broadband available to the masses, and how would this be a big game changer? Thank you.
Yes, I think as I already mentioned that the Wi-Fi 6 nicely complements the existing 5G use case, particularly for stationary and the fixed users and the hotspots case. And considering also the subscriber density and also the fact that we do not have the availability of fiber to the home, to each and every home. And as Kiran Kuchi also mentioned, that there is an increasing reliance of using the internet access only on the cellular devices. There is, since wireless internet is one of the primary internet access, not only for the broadband, but also for many applications. It is therefore very essential that more and more spectrum is made available. In fact, that is why we have said that if more spectrum is delicensed for Wi-Fi 6, also, for other bands like V band, 60 gigahertz as well, that will really spur the large-scale deployment of connecting the unconnected or improving the broadband performance even in cities and tier 1 towns.
Thank you, and I think yes, and a very good point also by Professor Kiran about Wi-Fi 6 also encouraging new innovation and also by efficient access and creating opportunity for new applications as well. So yes, indeed, this is an important aspect. One more question which I wish to ask to the RKF team, probably Dr. Farinas or maybe Michael can help us here, is how when we try to look at the FSS criteria and the FSS parameters, we did try to look at some of the assumptions and the protection criteria. So what would be your comment on say a future services which may need more stringent protection? So what would be your comment on say future FSS services?
Want me to answer that, Farinas?
Yeah.
So I think what you're talking about is the possibility of satellites with very high GOVT, that for very narrow spot beams. Is that what you're talking about? We haven't seen those, but we did. There is a recommendation that has. I think it's a 5D recommendation that has characteristics of some satellites like that. We saw one with a very aggressive noise figure that had a GOVT that was maybe 10 dB higher than what we considered. That would be a very narrow spot beam for C-band. But if you had something like that, then, and assuming that there was no reduction in the number of RLANs that you would see, because there would be, right? Because it's spread out and now you're focusing the beam much more. But you could potentially see up to like a 10 dB increase in the I of RN. So your risk would be an I of RN of maybe minus 16 or 17. But you have to. But at the same time, I would consider that we've made a lot of conservative assumptions on terms of the number of RLANs that you would see. So yes, it would be more of a risk. It would be probably It might be higher than -20 I over n, but it would be close. It would be on that order. So I think for that type of a system, you need to consider that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. And sure, one of the things which I also believe is at these lower frequencies, a narrow spot beam also is something which is which may be more rare as compared to the higher millimeter wave bands. Having said this, and also we are coming to a close of the time that we had for the questions. Maybe I would like to hand it over back to Debashish to continue with the rest of the agenda. And thank you very much to all the panelists for taking the questions and helping us understand much better about the 6 GHz study and also the Indian context. Thank you. Over to you, Debashish.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity for us to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Farinaz. Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Dr. Puneet, for fielding the questions and passing them on to the panelists. Thanks a lot. We now come to the last segment of our program, which is the vote of thanks. I'm extremely honored and privileged to be given the opportunity to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of Broadband India Forum. So at the outset, I would first like to say my heartfelt thanks to Professor Abhay Karandikar, not just as the chief guest of this program, but also, sir, for having mentored the study right from the beginning till the end, and for ensuring that we have the right set of parameters and assumptions incorporated into the study to ensure that the study is as close as possible to the real world. Thank you so much, sir. And for also giving us your guidance from time to time, as well as also giving us the direction today as to how this report can really benefit the country as a whole, not just by the growth of Wi-Fi, which is required for digital inclusivity, but also because this band is extremely useful for the innovative use cases around AR, VR, and other aspects related to short-range devices, etc., which can come up in this band and can be a game changer going forward. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us the direction. I would also like to thank Professor Kiran Kuchi, Dean of R&D of IIT Hyderabad, for giving us an insight as to how 6 GHz can help in proliferation of broadband and also for development of innovative use cases, besides complementing the 5G proliferation also in India, because as we all know that licensed spectrum is only limited, and to be able to actually cater to high capacity downloads, you would need lots of unlicensed spectrum. And 6 GHz, that entire 6 GHz band, the 1200 megahertz, can provide sufficient bandwidth, which can help complement the mobile broadband, which is already there, and help do what is well known as the MDO, or the mobile data offload, thereby ensuring a higher quality of service from the mobile broadband. Thank you, sir, for giving us the insight. I would also like to thank the entire RKF team, starting with Ted, Mr. Ted Kaplan. Thank you so much, sir, for having given us today that excellent presentation about how the study was carried out, what are the assumptions, and what are the excellent outcomes that have come out of this study, and the fact that we have taken into account stringent assumptions regarding the existing services, which include the fixed satellite and the fixed services. And we have considered very, very stringent assumptions that in case of the existing services were to be enhanced, the placement of new services, or the new services based on the RLANs, are not going to affect the incumbents, and they would be thoroughly protected, and we could have a harmonious coexistence between the existing services and the new service that we are proposing here. So this is an excellent outcome, sir. Thank you very much for giving us the insight as to how this was done and the outcomes as well. Thanks. I would also like to thank the team members of RKF who've taken the trouble all these months to get to this particular stage, and therefore no words are enough to compliment Dr. Farinaz and Mike Mandel. I would also like to thank Mr. Tom Johnson, who's not here, but he's, I think, in the audience, and as well as David Marshak. I would like to thank each and every member of the RKF team, which has contributed to actually make this study and also make the results what they have been. So this is we can't thank you enough, sir and madam, for this excellent work that you have done. Also, I would like to thank our moderator for the Q&A session, who's been instrumental in helping us in work in steering this study inside from BIF, which is Dr. Puneet Rathod, along with his colleague Jitendra Singh, who's, I think, in the audience. So thanks, Dr. Puneet, and also thanks to Jitendra. And no words would be enough to actually express our gratitude as to what the effort that you have undertaken to get this study delivered on the ground. Thank you so much, sir. I would like to thank Mr. Rishabh Dara, along with the team from Facebook, which is Alan Norman and Michael Setlin. No words would be enough to express my gratitude to them for the efforts that they have made to get this done. I would also like to thank Ashwini Rana from Facebook India also for steering and guiding this project right from the start to finish. Also wish to thank the Spectrum Committee, under whose leadership this project was initiated and was carried out. And I would like to thank the chair, Mr. Parag Kar, who also happens to be a vice president of BIF. I would like to thank him as well. And also thank the co-chair of the Spectrum Committee, Mr. K. Krishna from Hughes, who also contributed to the preparation and to the enhancement of the report. Thank you, sirs, so much. At last but not the least, I would also like to thank our BIF team led by Mr. T.V. Ramachandran, without whose guidance, mentorship, and his foresight, we would not have perhaps carried out this study at all. So thank you, sir, once again for giving us the guidance and the leadership to help deliver this excellent report on the ground, sir. I would also like to thank our other members of the BIF team, Mr. Rajat Mukherjee, Director General, and other colleagues in the BIF Directorate, who have also worked day and night to make sure that this report gets delivered on time, and for all their support and cooperation. I wish to thank them as well. So with these few words, I would now like to sort of bring this meeting to a close, the session to a close. So thank you very much. Good to folks in the US and in the West, East, and in the US, please, we wish you a very nice day. And for folks in India and in this part of the world, a good evening, and hope you have a pleasant evening and enjoy your evening as well. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.